You know what nobody talks about? The moment right after you hit $20,000. Not the celebration, not the screenshot, not the I finally made it feeling. I'm talking about what happens the day after, the week after. Because here's the truth that most people in this space will never tell you. Hitting $20,000 doesn't solve your problems. It creates entirely new ones. And if you're not prepared for what comes next, that milestone becomes a ceiling instead of a launch pad. I've been sitting on this topic for a while because I wanted to make sure I got it right. I wanted to make sure I wasn't just recycling the same generic advice you've heard 1,000 times about scaling and reinvesting and blah, blah, blah. What I want to talk about today goes deeper than tactics. This is about the psychological, financial, and strategic shifts that separate the people who hit 20,000 and keep going from the people who hit 20,000 and quietly plateau for the next 2 years, wondering what went wrong. And before you think this doesn't apply to you because you haven't hit that number yet, stay right here. Because understanding what's coming before you arrive is exactly how you avoid the traps that catch almost everyone else off guard. Let me paint you a picture. You've been grinding. You've been posting, creating, building, selling, whatever your thing is. You've had some wins, some painful losses, and slowly but surely the money started coming in. Then one day you cross that $20,000 mark, and something weird happens inside your brain. There's a shift, and most people misread that shift completely. Here's what actually happens in your psychology at this stage. Before 20,000, your primary emotion is hunger, pure, relentless hunger. You're trying to prove something to yourself, to people who doubted you, maybe to a boss you want to quit on, maybe to a version of yourself that you're trying to leave behind. That hunger is an incredible fuel. It drives you to work at weird hours, to push through rejection, to keep going when nothing seems to be working. Hunger is one of the most powerful motivators that exists. But once you cross a significant threshold, that hunger starts to shift into something else. For some people, it shifts into confidence, which is great. For most people, though, it shifts into something much more dangerous. It shifts into comfort. And comfort, my friend, is the silent killer of momentum. Think about it. When you had nothing to lose. Every bet you made was with house money, in the sense that you were already at zero. You were already uncomfortable. Discomfort was your default state, so taking risks didn't feel as scary, because what's the worst that could happen? You stay exactly where you are? But now you have 20,000. Now you have something. Now you have proof of concept and a little bit of padding. And suddenly, the risks feel different. Suddenly, losing feels more real because you have more to lose. And this is where so many people unconsciously start playing defense when they should still be playing offense. The first major shift that changes everything after 20,000 is what I call the identity lag. Your financial reality has outpaced your identity. You've made $20,000, but somewhere in your head, you still identify as someone who is trying to make it rather than someone who has made it, at some level at least. And this creates a really specific kind of self-sabotage that's almost invisible while it's happening. When your identity doesn't match your results, you unconsciously work to bring your results back in line with your identity. This is called identity level regression, and it shows up in sneaky ways. You start overthinking decisions you used to make quickly. You start second-guessing the systems that got you here. You start adding unnecessary complexity to things that were working just fine. You start looking for the next big thing, instead of doubling down on what's already producing. All of this happens because your unconscious mind is running an old program that says, I am someone who is still figuring this out, and it will actively work to keep you in that story, unless you deliberately rewrite it. The fix here is not motivational fluff about believing in yourself. The fix is concrete. You need to update your reference points. Most people at 20,000 are still consuming content from and comparing themselves to people at the very beginning of the journey. But now you need to be spending more time studying what people at 200,000 are doing. You need to be in rooms, virtually or physically, with people who are further along, not to feel inferior, but to normalize the next level in your brain so that your identity starts stretching to meet it. Now, let's talk about something that will catch you completely off guard if you're not watching for it: the operational complexity explosion. When you're early in your journey, your business or your income stream is relatively simple. You have maybe one or two main ways you're making money, a handful of clients or customers or whatever the case may be. And your systems are basic, because basic is all you need. But as you approach and cross 20,000, things start to multiply in ways you didn't plan for.
You have more clients to manage, more content to create, more platforms to maintain, more tools you've added, more emails, more DMs, more decisions every single day. And here's the brutal part. You're trying to manage all of this growth with the same infrastructure you had when you were making $3,000 a month. You're basically trying to run a growing company with a startup's backend. And this is where things start breaking. This is the stage where you start missing follow-ups, where deliverables start slipping, where you're working more hours than ever, but somehow producing less than you did when things were simpler. It's not because you've gotten lazy or lost your edge. It's because your systems haven't scaled alongside your results, and the gap between the two is creating friction everywhere. The shift you need to make here is moving from doing mode to designing mode. Instead of just executing tasks every day, you need to step back and start designing the machine that executes those tasks. This means creating repeatable processes for the things you do over and over. It means getting serious about time blocking, so your creative and strategic work doesn't get eaten alive by reactive busy work. It means being honest about which activities are actually generating income and which ones are just keeping you occupied and feeling productive. And here's something most people completely skip at this stage. You need to start thinking about leverage before you're desperate for it. The worst time to hire help or bring in a collaborator or set up systems is when you're already drowning. Because when you're drowning, you make rushed decisions, you choose wrong, and you end up more overwhelmed than before. The best time to build infrastructure is when things are going well, and you have bandwidth to do it thoughtfully. Let's shift into the financial dimension, because this is where I see the most painful and avoidable mistakes at this level. $20,000 feels like a lot when you're working toward it, and in many contexts it is a lot. But in business terms, $20,000 is deceptively small, because of what it costs you to earn it and what it needs to do once you have it. Here's a hard question most people won't ask themselves at this stage. Of that $20,000, how much did you actually keep? Because if you're running any kind of real operation, paying for tools, ads, software, maybe some help here and there, your actual margins might be significantly lower than you think. And if you haven't been tracking this honestly, you might be celebrating a number that's a lot less impressive on the inside than it looks from the outside. This is the moment where you need to get serious about financial literacy in a way that you probably weren't prioritizing before. Not bookkeeping in a boring sense, though yes, you need that too, but understanding the actual economics of what you're building. What is your cost per acquisition if you're running any kind of marketing? What is your lifetime value per customer or client? What is your effective hourly rate across everything you're doing? These numbers tell you something far more important than your top-line revenue. They tell you whether your business is actually healthy or whether you're just running fast on a treadmill. The $20,000 mark is also the exact point where the question of reinvestment becomes critical and also genuinely confusing, because you've got enough to do something meaningful with, but you're not yet at a place where you can make big bets without real consequences if they don't work out. So the question of where to put money back into the business is genuinely high stakes in a way it wasn't when you were working with smaller numbers. There's a framework I find useful here, and it comes down to 3 categories. First, protect the engine. Whatever is actually generating your income right now needs to be resourced properly. This is not the time to underfund your core operation to fund experiments. Second, buy back time. The highest leverage thing most people at this level can do with money is invest it in getting time back, whether that's through hiring, automation, outsourcing things that are eating your hours but not requiring your specific skills. Third, and only third, invest in growth. Once your core is protected and you've created some breathing room in your schedule, then you think about what you're going to do to grow to the next level. Most people do this backwards. They spend on growth first because growth is exciting. They underfund their operations, they stayed overwhelmed and never buy back time, and then they wonder why they feel like they're working harder for the same or worse results. Let's get into something that doesn't get talked about enough, the social and relational dimension of hitting $20,000. Because the money changing isn't the only thing that changes.
The people around you change too. Or, more accurately, your relationship with the people around you starts to shift in ways that can be deeply uncomfortable if you're not expecting them. Some of the people who were cheering you on at the beginning start to go quiet as you get further. This isn't always jealousy. Sometimes it's people who are just intimidated or don't know how to relate to what you're building. But sometimes it is a little bit of jealousy, and the way that shows up is subtle. It's the offhand comment that undercuts your confidence. It's the, well, don't forget not everyone can do what you're doing, dismissal dressed up as humility. It's the friend who keeps bringing up the risks every time you talk about your next move. At the same time, your peer group needs to evolve, and this can feel disloyal even when it isn't. The conversations that used to energize you, the ones about whether online business is real, about which platforms are worth building on, about how to land your first client, those conversations don't serve you anymore. You're past that. And if you spend all your social and intellectual energy in those conversations, you're keeping yourself back without even realizing it. This doesn't mean abandoning people or becoming some insufferable success-obsessed robot. It means deliberately building relationships with people who are operating at a level above where you are right now. It means being intentional about whose thinking you're exposing yourself to, because ideas are contagious and you want to be catching the right ones. Here's a pattern I've noticed consistently at this level, and it's one of the most interesting dynamics in this whole space. The $20,000 mark is exactly where the gap between people who make it and people who plateau becomes most visible. And the difference is almost never about strategy. Everyone at this level has access to good strategies. The information is out there. The difference is almost always about one thing: tolerance for ambiguity.
Let me explain what I mean. Up until 20,000, you were operating with relatively clear feedback loops. You tried something, it worked or it didn't, you adjusted, you kept moving. But at 20,000, the game changes in a specific way. The moves that are going to take you to the next level are bigger, slower, and less immediately clear. You might invest 3 months into building something before you know whether it's working. You might make a pivot that looks like a step backward before it becomes a leap forward. The feedback loops get longer, the bets get bigger, and the ability to sit with not knowing becomes absolutely critical. People who can't tolerate that ambiguity do one of two things. Either they bail out of the bigger bets too early, before they've had time to produce results, or they refuse to make them at all and stay stuck doing the same thing that got them to 20,000, which conveniently is exactly how you stay at 20,000 forever. Building tolerance for ambiguity isn't about being reckless or ignoring evidence. It's about being able to distinguish between this isn't working and this hasn't had enough time yet. It's about having clear criteria for what success looks like before you start something, so you're not evaluating it through the fog of impatience. It's about trusting the process enough to let it play out, while staying honest with yourself about whether the fundamentals are sound. I want to talk about offer evolution because this is one of the most practical and important things that needs to happen at this stage. The offer that got you to 20,000 is not necessarily the offer that gets you to 50 or 100. This is a truth that's both exciting and a little uncomfortable to sit with, because by the time you reach 20,000, you're usually pretty attached to what you've built. It took work to get it working. It feels risky to mess with it. But here's what actually happens if you don't evolve your offer. You hit a natural ceiling because you've extracted most of the value from that particular positioning with that particular audience in that particular way. Growth slows. You push harder with the same tactics and get diminishing returns. You blame the market or the algorithm or the economy, when actually the problem is that you haven't updated the product. Offer evolution doesn't mean throwing away everything you've built. It means looking honestly at what your audience actually wants now that you have real data from real customers or clients. It means asking what problems they're having that you're not solving yet. It means looking at where you're delivering the most value and asking how you could deliver even more of that. Sometimes offer evolution is about going deeper, creating a premium version of what you already have for the people who want more. Sometimes it's about going broader, solving adjacent problems for the same audience. Sometimes it's about niching down even further, because the more specific you get, often the more valuable you become. The key is that you can't do this evolution well from the outside. You have to be in genuine conversation with your market, not just looking at data, but actually talking to people,
understanding their language, understanding their frustrations and desires at a level that's granular enough to act on. Let's bring this home with what I think is the most important overarching mental shift that has to happen at this stage. Before 20,000, your main job is to prove that it's possible, to prove that the model works, that you can do this, that it's not just a theory but an actual thing that generates actual money in the real world. That's a specific and important job, and doing it requires a specific mindset: scrappy, resourceful, willing to do a lot with a little, comfortable with uncertainty. But after 20,000, your job changes. Your job now is to prove that it's scalable, and scalability requires a completely different set of skills and a completely different mindset. Where scrappy served you before, systems serve you now. Where hustle was the answer, leverage is the answer. Where proving it was the goal, growing it is the goal. And the people who understand this transition, who can actually make the mental switch from one mode to the other, are the ones who look back 18 months later and barely recognize how far they've come. The ones who don't make the switch keep doing what worked before and wonder why the returns keep shrinking. They keep being the operator when they need to be the architect. They keep hustling when they need to be building. And the frustrating thing is, it's not obvious that this is what's happening. It looks from the outside like they're working just as ever, because they are. They're just working hard inside a framework that's too small for where they need to go. So what does all of this mean for you practically? It means that if you're approaching 20,000, or you've recently crossed it, the work right now isn't primarily about finding new tactics. It's about going through a genuine upgrade at the level of how you see yourself, how you structure your time, how you manage your money, how you design your offers, and how you relate to the people around you. That's a lot to hold, I know. But the fact that you're watching this, that you've made it this far into this video, tells me that you're the kind of person who takes this seriously. And taking it seriously, really sitting with these questions and doing the honest internal work they require, is exactly what separates the people who build something lasting from the people who have a flash of success and then fade. $20,000 is not the destination. It never was. It's a signal. It's proof that the foundation is there. Now the question is what you're willing to build on top of it. And the answer to that question isn't found in a new course or a new strategy or a new platform. It's found when you're honest with yourself about which of the things I just walked through are showing up in your own situation right now. Because awareness is always the first move. Once you see it, you can change it. And once you change it, the next level stops being a dream and starts being a direction. If this hit different for you, drop a comment below and tell me which part landed the hardest. I read every single one, and it genuinely helps me understand where you're at, so I can keep making content that actually moves the needle for you. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe, because we go deep on this stuff every single week, and I don't want you to miss what's coming next.